Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really interesting set of ideas. We're looking at recent financial news, career shifts, all through the lens of Robert Kiyosaki's commentary. And we'll also fold in some crucial global economic shifts
Hmm.
and finish up with the power of compound interest, in different parts of our lives.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a fascinating mix of sources you've pulled together. We've got news from April, May 2024 covering Kiyosaki's warnings, right?
Yeah.
About a potential market crash, and also economic jitters in China, Elon Musk's challenges at Tesla, even things like Mixu versus Starbucks, China's EV progress, flying cars even.
Flying cars, right.
And then there's Kiyosaki's thoughts from his high school reunion, his views on debt, his own, and younger generations. And like you said, we wrap up with the June 2024 piece on compound interest.
So our mission here is really to, connect these dots, these seemingly different pieces. We want to pull out the key insights, maybe those aha moments, help you see how these trends and Kiyosaki's themes might link up without making it too overwhelming. Okay.
So,
All right, let's get into it. Starting with Kiyosaki's pretty strong warnings about the market. He's talking about a super bubble, isn't he?
he is, yeah. He's been quite vocal about this, the super bubble idea in stocks and real estate. And his main advice is to shift towards what he calls real assets.
Real assets, like
Well, specifically, he mentions gold, silver, and Bitcoin.
okay. And what's really driving this rather pessimistic view of his?
For Kiyosaki, it seems to boil down to some, fundamental economic worries. He points to the U.S. national debt, how fast it's growing, apparently around $1 trillion every 90 days, which is quite something.
A trillion every 90 days. Wow.
Yeah. And he also sees the potential risk of the U.S. Defaulting on its debt,
Yeah.
plus, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. He sees all that as creating a really shaky foundation.
And he uses specific examples to back this up, right?
Yes, he does. A key one he brings up is U.S. home prices. They're at record highs, right?
Yeah.
But mortgage rates are also really high. To him, that mismatch signals a bubble. And he also looks at the stock market, also at record highs. He thinks a lot of that is, well, hype around AI,
Mhm.
and also this expectation that the Fed's going to start cutting rates eventually.
Right. It's an odd situation. High prices, even with these, let's say, challenging conditions. And he connects this to how everyday people in the U.S. are doing.
Absolutely. Kiyosaki really stresses that, many Americans are struggling with the high cost of living, rising debt levels. It's tough for a lot of people.
And this isn't just a U.S. thing for him. He brings in the global picture, too, like China.
Well, yeah, what's interesting there is the US dollar getting stronger globally. That makes other currencies weaker, relatively speaking. And we are seeing reports that people in China are buying more gold, sort of as a way to protect their assets because their own currency is weakening. So it's a reaction to these global shifts.
Interesting. Now, usually people think of real estate as safe, right?
Mhm.
Especially in uncertain times. But Kiyosaki seems less keen, particularly if there's a crash.
That's right. His focus really shifts to liquidity, how easily you can sell something. He prefers gold, silver, Bitcoin because, well, you can usually buy and sell them faster compared to something like real estate, which can become illiquid, harder to sell quickly if the market turns down. Finding buyers gets tricky.
Right. Liquidity becomes king in a crisis. Okay, so that frames Kiyosaki's view. Now let's look at the actual economic picture in the U.S. and China based on those articles. What about the U.S. housing market specifically?
Well, the data does show some concerning signs. Existing home sales dropped quite a bit in March 2024, down 4.3% from the month before, and also down 3.7% from the year before.
But sales are down, yet prices are still sky high.
Exactly. That's the paradox. The average home price hit a record for March. $393,500. That's nearly 5% higher than the previous year. And if you look back just 4 years, it's jumped like 50%.
50%. And with mortgage rates around, what, 7.5%? That must make things incredibly difficult.
It really does. Affordability is a huge issue. The average monthly mortgage payment, also a record, $2,775. That's up 11% year over year. And the income you need to even qualify for that, it's almost doubled since the pandemic started.
Bubbled.
Yeah, nearly $76,000 a year. But the thing is, the average household income in the U.S. is, well, quite a bit lower than that. So homeownership is just out of reach for many, many people.
Ouch. Yeah, that paints a stark picture. Okay, what about the stock market? Kiyosaki suggested a bubble there too.
Well, we did see the S&P 500 and NASDAQ hit records, a lot of that driven by, AI excitement and also those hopes for Fed rate cuts.
Huh.
But yeah, investor optimism seems to be cooling off a bit. Inflation is sticking around. And there's this growing feeling the Fed might not cut rates much, or maybe not at all in 2024.
So the thing that was boosting the market might not even happen. Okay, let's
Yeah.
pivot to China then. The article mentioned significant economic anxiety there too.
Yes, there's definitely a sense of pessimism, and the Chinese yuan has been weakening. And just like we mentioned earlier, this is driving Chinese citizens towards gold as a safe haven, really, a hedge against inflation.
Right.
Spot gold prices even popped above $2,400 an ounce recently.
So Kiyosaki's advice on real assets,
Mm,
we're actually seeing people do that in China with gold.
exactly. It's happening. Driven by currency worries, slower growth, it mirrors his concerns.
And it wasn't just individuals, right? The people back in China, the PBOC, they've been buying gold too.
Oh yeah, big time. They've been consistently buying since November 2022, increased their gold reserves by 16%, up to over 2,250 tons. They had like 17 straight months of buying more gold, reaching 2,262 tons by end of March 24.
That's a huge amount of gold. What's the thinking behind that for the central bank?
It seems like a few things. The weaker yuan makes gold attractive, obviously. But also, even with all this buying, gold is still only about 4% of China's total reserves.
Only 4%. So they could potentially keep buying a lot more.
Potentially, yeah. And it's not just China. Globally, other central banks are also upping their gold purchases and reducing holdings of other foreign currencies. It suggests broader uncertainty about, the global economy.
So China buying gold isn't isolated. It's part of a bigger trend.
Definitely. Global gold trading hit a record in 2023. Central banks bought over 1,000 tons in 22 and 23 combined, and the PBOC was the single biggest buyer in 2023, their second biggest buying year since 1950, apparently.
Wow.
And interestingly, even though overall global gold demand dipped slightly, jewelry demand in China was actually up 10%, so strong consumer interest too.
Okay, so we're seeing these potential bubbles in the U.S., anxiety in China, a flight to gold.
Hmm.
Definitely interconnected global stuff happening, which seems to echo some of Kiyosaki's warnings.
Yeah.
Now, let's switch gears a bit. Kiyosaki's high school reunion. Sounds like that triggered some thoughts on education and careers.
It really did, yeah. He told this story about his old guidance counselor. Apparently, the counselor basically wrote him and his friend Mike off as two clowns, said they wouldn't amount to much, especially compared to the, quote-unquote, smart kids.
And the punchline, years later, is quite something.
Totally. At the reunion, he looks around and realizes that many of those smart classmates, they ended up working for him and Mike, the supposed underachievers.
It really flips the script on conventional wisdom about school grades predicting success, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Kiyosaki's point is that other skills, maybe less conventional ones, are often more important in the real world. Things like communication, being adaptable, resilience, bouncing back from failure.
Things you don't necessarily learn from a textbook.
Exactly. He noticed that many who did well academically tended to become employees, not necessarily entrepreneurs.
Which brings us to his idea about becoming. Worthless was the word he used, I think,
Oh.
if you don't keep learning.
Yeah, in this information age. He uses AI as a prime example. A field that exploded, wasn't really taught traditionally, but now skills there are super valuable. He talks about a potential crisis at 30, a real risk of your job disappearing if you don't keep adapting, keep learning new things.
And this isn't just a Western thing, is it? The article mentioned the curse of 35 in Asia, especially China.
Right. This is a really important concept over there, the curse of 35. It's a big concern. Initially, it was maybe more about tech companies laying off older, more experienced workers.
But it's broader now.
It seems so, yeah. Especially with higher youth unemployment in some places, companies increasingly seem to prefer younger workers, maybe lower salaries, perceived as more ambitious, even for jobs that aren't super specialized.
And the examples from China were quite stark, like actual hiring age limits under 35, or replacing older workers with younger ones.
Yeah, and a survey mentioned in the piece from Zaopin in 2023 found that something like 85% of workers in China believe this curse of 35 is real, especially in finance, auto, internet sectors. CNN even framed it as millennials being too young to retire, too old to be hired.
Wow. What's driving that? Is it just cost or something else? Adaptability, culture.
It's likely a mix of factors. Cost is probably part of it, but perhaps also perceptions about adaptability, maybe even a cultural bias towards youth in certain fast-moving industries.
It certainly puts pressure on people to constantly reinvent themselves throughout their careers. The article also mentioned how mid-career setbacks can affect risk-taking later on.
That's right. If you face a significant failure after investing years in something, it can make you more cautious. You might then lean towards job security, stability, rather than taking another leap on a new venture, even if it has potential.
It really highlights how that old idea of a straight, linear career path might be,
Yeah.
well, changing, or maybe just less common now. Okay, let's shift again. Let's talk about Kiyosaki and debt. His philosophy is often pretty counterintuitive.
It is. He's famous for advocating using debt strategically to buy assets. He's even said he has about $1 billion in debt himself.
$1 billion? Wow. What for?
He says he used it to buy around 15,000 rental properties. He sees it as a hedge against economic instability.
And his main idea is this difference between good debt and bad debt.
Exactly. For him, good debt is when you borrow to finance things that can make you money or grow in value, like, rental properties, funding a business, investments, stuff like that.
Okay.
Bad debt is borrowing for consumer goods, things that usually go down in value, gadgets, cars, impulse buys.
Which is quite different from how many younger people seem to be using debt today, based on one of the articles.
Yeah, there's definitely a big trend towards using installment loans, buy now, pay later, or BNPL schemes, mostly for consumption. Juniper Research predicts the global BNPL market will hit like $334 billion this year.
Billion with a B.
Yep. And potentially nearly $700 billion by 2028. Huge growth.
And credit card debt is up too for young adults in the U.S.
It is. TransUnion data showed that for 22 to 24-year-olds, the average credit card debt at the end of 2023 was over $2,800, which is quite a bit higher than it was 10 years ago.
The article also mentioned these installment loans being like phantom debt. What's the issue there? Like they don't show up on credit reports.
Precisely. Not always, anyway. They aren't always tracked by the big credit bureaus like regular loans or credit cards are. So people might not have a clear picture of their total debt burden, might feel more financially secure than they actually are. And we're seeing some worrying signs, like more people paying late or missing payments on these BNPL loans in the UK, in the US. And even more concerning, some people are using other credit, like credit cards, just to pay off these installment loans.
Oh, like a debt cycle.
Exactly, a potentially dangerous cycle.
And the overall household debt picture in the U.S. is also pretty high.
Astronomical, really. Federal Reserve Bank of New York data put total U.S. household debt at $17.5 trillion at the end of 2023.
Trillion.
And a lot of that debt is being used for essentials, sure, but also for these depreciating assets, not really for building wealth. Surveys suggest people use BNPL either to overspend or just because they don't have the cash, maybe their credit cards are maxed out.
And technology, online shopping.
Yeah.
Which makes it so easy to borrow for consumption now.
Absolutely. It's frictionless, almost. Click a button, and you've borrowed money. And we are seeing rising credit card delinquency rates in the U.S., too. Highest since 2012, apparently. That's a red flag for financial stress.
And those 0% interest offers, they can be traps.
They definitely can be. If you don't understand the terms or can't pay it off before the promotional period ends, the interest rates can jump dramatically. It can really catch people out, especially if financial literacy is low.
It's such a contrast to Kiyosaki using debt, strategically to buy income-producing assets. Okay, finally, let's move to something maybe a bit more uplifting. The power of compound interest. The article discussed this not just financially, but for life and careers, too.
That's right. It kicked off with that famous Einstein quote, right? Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And it used that classic chessboard analogy, the grains of rice doubling on each square.
Right, illustrates exponential growth.
Exactly. Shows how small, consistent efforts, tiny accumulations can lead to massive results over time. The key message is really about long-term commitment, sticking with something, not just looking for quick wins.
I like the example of Mr. Wang, the clock restorer in the Forbidden City. That really brought it home outside of finance.
It did. 40 years. 40 years dedicated to honing his craft, patiently working, became a true master. It really highlights the power of sustained focus, Avoiding distractions. There was that Cicero quote, too. However weak you may be, if you devote your full effort to a single goal, you are bound to achieve something.
Yeah, persistence pays off. The more focused you are, the more it compounds.
Seems to be the idea, yeah. In your skills, your expertise.
And the article applied this compounding idea to investing in yourself, too, not just money.
Yes, like the example of Zhang Meng. She invested heavily in studying history. Then she applied that deep knowledge to build a successful online learning platform. So, investing in yourself, skills, knowledge, even your image or brand can pay off significantly over time, like financial compounding.
And then there was the compound interest of habits. I found that really interesting.
That's a really powerful concept. The example of Liang Shiming was great. Lifelong habits of exercise, reading, writing, and he was healthy, productive into his 90s.
Incredible.
And that Ashinsky quote really nailed it. If you develop good habits, you will enjoy their benefits for the rest of your life. If you develop bad habits, you will pay endless debts.
Wow. Yeah.
So bad habits like procrastination, blaming others, they compound negatively. While good habits are like nutrients for growth, they
Yeah.
build on each other.
And ultimately, that long-term dedication, those good habits, they can lead to mastery, leadership in your field.
Exactly. Compound interest isn't just about money. Applied consistently to your skills, your knowledge, your habits, it's this incredibly powerful force for growth, for resilience, for achieving those big long-term goals in everything, really.
So wrapping up this deep dive then, we've covered quite a bit. Kiyosaki's warnings, market instability, his focus on real assets. We looked at the economic pressures in the U.S. and China. We explored how careers are changing, that curse of 35, the limits of just traditional education.
Right. And the dangers of consumer debt versus using debt strategically, like Kiyosaki suggests. And finally, that really profound power of compound interest applied to time, money, habits.
And as you've been listening, we hope you're thinking about how these trends, these ideas, might connect to your own life. Your finances, your career, maybe even just your daily routines.
Yeah,
What about
absolutely.
you?
So here's a final thought for you to maybe chew on. Just reflect on one small habit or maybe one specific area of learning that you could consciously decide to cultivate consistently. Think about applying that principle of compound interest, that steady small effort over time. How could that lead to significant growth for you? Build resilience in this, constantly changing world. Something to think about. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.